Hi BookTube, and welcome to another fiction review. From the time that I was a child, I was fascinated by myths and folk tales. They seemed, and I can't describe exactly how, they seemed to have a kind of power that was different than the power from other kinds of stories. And it was probably that mythic fascination that initially drew me into Christianity, but even after my faith lapsed, that it remained and just as strong. And so if you can identify the same kind of fascination in your own life, then this may be a novel for you. Today we are reviewing Macunaíma, The Hero with No Character, by Mario de Andrade. It was translated in 2023 into English, so very recently, by Katrina Dodson, but it was originally published in 1928. The text that I read had 318 pages altogether, but the actual text of the story is very short, only 187 pages. And I'm describing it as modernist. That's the general critical opinion of the novel, modernist, but also mythic fiction. It is a syncretism of South American, and I should add, by South American, that includes some African and European cultural elements, and all that is mixed in with contemporary scenes or contemporary objects. I own this book, and it is my Alphabet Soup TBR book 6 of 26, and it is standing in today for the letter U, because I did not actually own a book where the author's surname began with the letter U. And on top of that, there was another special thing about this book. It was one of the 4 wild card purchases that I allowed myself to make during my 23-24 Read What I Own challenge. So I was only allowed to buy 4 books over 12 months. I succeeded. I don't know if I could do that again. It was good to do, but I don't know if one could do it multiple times. At any rate, I paid full price for it. And that's because I had to go to Foyles in April 2024 to buy a birthday gift for a bookish person. So of course I had to go to Foyles. Why? Because there are 6 floors of books in that store, and I thought I could get something that I knew that person would like, and I could get it in hardback. It was a special birthday. And can you imagine being at a shop like Foyles with all those books, and you're on a Read What You Own year? And so I decided now is the time that I can use up one of my wildcard books. That's hardly consolation, though, because to stand in a store that size and tell yourself you can buy one book, I decided it had to be an important book. The back cover write-up on this one used the phrase landmark novel, and the translation to English was quite recent, as you can see. The author name in the title meant absolutely nothing to me, and so I thought, okay, this is all boxes ticked. This is something special, and I have never heard of it before. Now, these plain blue covers, if you haven't already found out, are Fitzcarraldo editions. There will be a link to the publisher's website in my description box, because I think they're kind of interesting. In their own words, they focus on, quote, ambitious, imaginative, and innovative writing, both in translation and in the English language. And just a look through some of their titles is interesting. Of course, a few of them have been really popular on BookTube already, but there's quite a number that have not been presented on YouTube as far as I can tell. Let's meet our author. Mario Raul de Mores Andrade was born in 1893 in Sao Paulo. He was a piano prodigy, and so his education initially focused heavily on music. And then in 1913, Mario's older brother Renato died suddenly while he was playing a football game, and Mario was greatly affected. He paused his studies, and when he did try to play piano in performance, he would experience unpredictable hand tremors. And so he finished his degree at the Music and Drama Conservatory in Sao Paulo with a view to just becoming a music professor. And then he had his first published volume of poetry in 1917. I will not try to pronounce the Portuguese. I haven't practiced all the words, but I'd love to hear someone say it. The English translation, however, which fascinated me, the title is, There is a Drop of Blood in Each Poem, as I think there should be in every poem. It should be that personal. It should be that important. After this publication, which didn't make a great impact, to be honest, Andrade began a series of trips into the Brazilian countryside. That's not really saying enough because of the size of the country it is and its diversity of landscape. Perhaps we should say the countrysides. And he went there to accumulate information about Brazilian life, music, folklore, and he did this over several years. This was the raw material that was going to feed his imagination and eventually inspire Macunaíma. He also developed friendships with a group of young poets and artists in the city who were interested in the various modernist movements that were influencing art in Europe in the early 20th century, particularly Expressionism, where it's important to bring subjectivity into the piece that you are working on. And this is another one of those authors whose biography is important to read because he's just had such an impact on the country where he's lived. He's a face that appears on Brazilian currency. He was also the instigator of the 1922 Semana de Arte Moderna, or Modern Art Week, which is a commemoration that continues to this day. So yeah, he needs to be known better. You'd need to read a biography. I feel I need to read a biography. And at the moment, I don't believe there is a book in English. There is one Portuguese biography that I found written by Jason Tercio. I don't know if it could ever be translated or if a new one could be written in English. Hopefully this book will get better known and people will become more curious about De Andrade. Regarding the setting, the novel begins with this sentence. In the depths of the virgin forest was born Macunaíma. This is a story which is going to be rich with the flora and the fauna of the Brazilian rainforest, particularly the many species of ants. There is a quote that gets repeated throughout the book. It might be a proverb, I don't know. And it goes, "Ants aplenty and nobody's healthy, so go the ills of Brazil." Expect to sail down rivers with this book, to run up and down mountains, and to be fascinated and bemused, just like Macunaíma was, at the strange goings-on in the big cities. And there is a far-off place, called Europe, and the odd European settler, and a strange collection of customs that have been transplanted across the Atlantic. Macunaíma enjoys playing around with these cultural tidbits, but he never takes them too seriously. In terms of time, we are in mythic time, and of course mythic time is every time, all at once. As if there were no past, present, or future, as if they were all one. When Macunaíma is a child, his story feels very, very old, like the virgin rainforest and the sky, which is still acquiring stars like Beta Centauri. Not all the stars are in the sky yet. It feels that old. And yet, a few weeks later, there we are in modern Sao Paulo with trolley buses and policemen and Macunaíma speaking pig Latin. And even within one scene, there can be a mingling of things which seem very old and very new, and some that are just the kind of complete nonsense that would have really pleased authors like Lewis Carroll or Edward Lear or Leonora Carrington. And I'd like to read a passage from pages 70 to 71, where Macunaíma transforms himself into a woman, hoping to use feminine wiles to retake a prized possession that has been stolen by an infamous giant. So then, Macunaíma borrowed from the boarding house madame some pairs of frou-frou things, a rouge machine, a silk stockings machine, a slip machine scented with sakaka bark, a girdle machine fragrant with lemongrass, a décolleté machine spritzed with patchouli, lacy fingerless glove machines, all them frou-frou things. Then he dangled 2 pointy banana flowers from his chest and got dressed up like that. To complete the look, he smeared some blue dye from the campeche tree over his little kid eyelids, which grew languid. All that stuff sure was heavy, but he turned into the most beautiful French lady, perfumed with jurema, and a sprig of Paraguayan pine pinned onto her heaving patriotism to ward off the evil eye, and she set out for the palazzo, of Venceslau Pietro Pietra. And Venceslau Pietro Pietra was Pie Me, the giant, eater of men. On his way out the boarding house, Macunaima ran into a scissor-tailed hummingbird. He didn't like that bad omen one bit and considered ditching the rendezvous, but since a promise made is a debt unpaid, he did an incantation and kept going. He got there to find the giant at the front gate waiting. After several deep bows, Pie Me picked the French lady's ticks and led her to the loveliest alcove with beams and rafters made from acora and iteuba wood. The checkerboard parquet was made of dark murapuranga and blonde satinwood. The alcove was furnished with those famous crocheted white hammocks from Marajao. Right in the center was a carved jacaranda table set with red and white porcelain dishes from Breves and ceramics from Belém, arranged on a lace tablecloth woven from banana fiber. Steaming in enormous clay vessels originally found in the caves along the Rio Cunani was takake with tusupi, soup made from a Paulista man out of the industrial freezers at the Continental Meat Packing Plant, alligator stew, and polenta. The wines were a superior Isa varietal procured from Iquitos, an imitation port from Minas Gerais, an 80-year-old Quesuma liqueur, ice-cold champagne from Sao Paulo, and Genipapo fruit cordial of great renown and foul as 3 days of rain. Adding the most charming decorative touch were those exquisite falchi bonbons with colorful paper cutouts and cookies from Rio Grande piled high in shiny black bowls lacquered with kumate sap and engraved with a pocket knife sourced from Monte Alegre. The French lady seated herself in a hammock and made dainty gestures as she began chewing. She was awfully hungry and dug in. Afterwards, she washed it all down with a glass of the premium vintage Isa and made up her mind to just waltz right into the matter at hand. She asked straight out whether it was indeed true that the giant possessed a muraquita in the shape of an alligator. And you see how that passage really gives you a sense of a mixing up of old and new, sometimes very old, and also different cultures, artifacts, and delicacies. And it also gives you a sense of the narrator's voice, because the narrator is a very lively storyteller, but they don't introduce themselves until the end of the book on page 212, and I'm reading here from the novel. It was that lone parrot who preserved in the silence all the sayings and feats of the hero. He recounted it to the man, then took wing for Lisbon. And that man is me, folks, and I've stayed behind to tell you this tale. That's why I came here. I crouched down on these leaves, picked my ticks, started strumming my guitar, and in this ragged tune and impure speech, I've sung these cares to the world, telling all the sayings and doings of Macunaima, hero of our people. And the style of that storyteller, as you'll be better able to tell from seeing the text rather than just hearing it, is this casual story told full of slang and idioms and euphemisms and tall tales as he goes through the life of Macunaima. And this is a good time to talk about the subtitle, The Hero with No Character. Macunaima is a folk hero, and think of any folk hero in any culture where the stories are clearly not about a real person who actually lived, although the name might have been preserved. To describe them as with no character could be a reflection on Macunaima's moral compass or the lack thereof, which we'll talk about in the problematic content section. But I think it makes no sense to judge the decisions of a personality that is not realistic. And Macunaima does not have the consistency that you would expect to get from a singular person. They shape-shift and they character shift. At times they feel like many individuals sharing a single body. They change skin color as well as you saw them dressing up to try to change gender. Their actions are so impulsive that you can't accept them as decisions, but more they're the story needing those actions to make a point, and Macunaíma is there to be the one who makes that point. The storyteller also knows several languages, indigenous and, of course, Portuguese, and he uses terms which a lot of English readers are not going to recognize. The Fitzcarraldo edition includes 56 pages of notes. These are not unhelpful, I've got to say that, but they tend to just introduce the reader to yet more unknown terms while they're defining the terms that you went there to find out about in the first place. I chose not to read the notes, although I do want to reread this story, and then I might go more slowly and reference the notes. I felt it was best to listen to this story as if I were just one of the mixed audience to whom the storyteller was, sitting there strumming his guitar and telling his tales to, and just take it in. Yes, there will probably be, and there were, a lot of things that went over my head, but if you love mythic tales, there's something about the sensual energy and the color and the unpredictability that kept me engaged. You may also, depending on your cultural background, you may read sections that will immediately remind you of folk tales that have been told in your own cultures or in cultures that you know a lot about. On page 73, there was a scene where Macunaíma mistakes a doll for a real person, and they start to fight with the doll. But the doll is coated with a kind of wax, and so every time Macunaíma strikes out with their hands and their feet, they start to stick to that doll. And immediately, of course, I thought of the tale of Brer Rabbit and the Tar Baby. Regarding the number of characters, Macunaíma is very gregarious, okay? He likes to meet lots of people and creatures and powers. Some encounters are one-off and brief and you never see the people again, and others continue throughout the story. If you felt the need to remember them, you could make a list. I mean, that might be interesting just to document the sheer variety of entities. Macunaíma is different things to these different people also. And the concept of quest and confrontation with an enemy to rescue something, that's the longest running story within the novel, and it's many stories mixed up. Macunaíma needs to reclaim a lost stone pendant that was given to him by his first wife. So there is kind of an Arthurian thing going on there too, or you can see the parallels with those stories. Problematic content. Oh my. I think I need John Keane, the introduction writer's help. Again, I'm going to quote him. He says, in addition to the cannibal motif and actual cannibalism in the text, contemporary readers may be taken aback by other elements of and moments in the novel that are misogynistic and sexist, racist, and appropriative. Truly, the novel itself represents, on one level, the epitome of cultural appropriation and remixing. And Macunaíma is an appropriation of lots of different cultural fragments. And that didn't seem inappropriate to me in the way it might in a different context. And that's because Mário de Andrade himself had a mixed cultural heritage, and he was also trying to talk about the cultural complexity of Brazil, the good and the bad. I think it's also important to be upfront right now about Macunaíma's sexual appetite. He is greedy for sex, and he rarely passes up an opportunity. He even transforms himself when he is a baby, kind of does a quick transformation into an adult male so that he can better enjoy the company of his babysitter. Okay? You may find, again, it might sound strange, but sex in the context of this myth, it always has a kind of youthful, uninhibited joy. It doesn't seem to be about real things happening to real people. It feels like it has something else to say besides that. It seems to be talking about just the joy of that intimacy, that the joy of the sensual pleasure itself. And it's true that Macunaíma gets himself in trouble, and the trouble isn't necessarily examined in terms of its impact, but the personalities involved, as I say, they're superhuman as Macunaíma is. They're not quite real. And so it's hard to know, how do you apply moral standards? This isn't a human situation. It is something else. It is mythic. But if you're still concerned that this novel has the amount of sexual content that I've already said it will. Okay, it is very erotic, but it is not explicit. All the sexual encounters in the book are described with the same euphemism, playing around. They played around. They played and played and played, that kind of thing. And there's only one instance where body parts are specifically named, but then it's not English or Portuguese terms that are being used. My rabbit hole is going to talk about a couple of thoughts that were inspired as I was reading the book. And I'm going to start by reading the very first paragraph of the novel to you. In the depths of the virgin forest was born Macunaíma, hero of our people. He was jet black and son to fear of the night. There came a moment when the silence grew so great, listening to the murmuring Rio Uriacuera, that the native Tapanhumas woman birthed an ugly child. That child is the one they called Macunaíma. Even as a boy, he did bewildering things. First off, he went more than 6 years without talking. If they coaxed him to talk, he'd holler, "Ah, just so lazy." And this is a phrase that gets repeated again and again throughout the novel. He'll holler out when he's a child, when he's an adult, "Ah, just so lazy." And that is always a precursor to him deciding not to go ahead and do something, not to follow somebody's lead, not to take action in a certain way. And Macunaíma, as I've already said, is not a consistent personality. So it would be incorrect for you now to think, oh, so he's lazy, is he? I thought, no. When Macunaíma wants something, or when they need to get away from something, then suddenly they have superhuman amounts of energy and drive and inventiveness and charm. So, they can almost be manic. It can be that level of high energy. And then suddenly they can let it all go just by saying the phrase, "Ah, just so lazy." And I don't know enough to comment on whether or how this reflects something about Brazilian culture. If anyone is watching out there and you've lived in Brazil, are living in Brazil right now, I would love to know. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Because what I've read online suggests that de Andrade was trying to portray his country, and I can only go by the book's classic status in Brazil to conclude that he must have succeeded. But over here, on this side of the Atlantic, me and any viewers who had a Protestant upbringing, of course, our culture only really reflects sort of half of Macunaíma, and that's the manic half that can never rest and is always trying to outdo, outrun, outperform, improve on our previous performance, exceed our targets, smash those goals. We always seem to need to have something new going on. If Macunaíma as myth has some value to me, then I think it was because it showed me that balance between, getting in there, getting things done, all the usual Protestant work ethic kind of thing. And then also the importance of just letting go sometimes. Just going, no, I'm not doing that. You know what? I'm not doing anything. Letting things go, or treating things that we always sometimes think of as important when they actually are not, giving them their true level of importance by ignoring them. And then there was another thought which occurred to me as well. Again, it goes along with this consideration of Macunaíma as a creature of opposites. They're manic, but they're also lazy. They're born in the Amazon jungle, and yet they're very comfortable in the city. They're sometimes strong, but they're sometimes so weak that the only way they survive is when others help them out. Mário de Andrade created a work that, yes, appropriated bits of African culture, indigenous Brazilian culture, European culture, and that's all the popular. And yet this combined work, this novel, is critically acclaimed and taught in schools in Brazil. And so my impression is that the book appeals both as a popular work and a literary one. Now that's just an impression, mind you, and I'm open to being corrected on that. But it did get me thinking, because in the West, all books really get categorized either as popular or as literary. You get some rare books that manage to hold their own in both categories, but it is rare. And I talked about this at the last Middlemarch meditation when we were reading Oliver Goldsmith's The Vicar of Wakefield, chapter 20, because that's a fantastic description of how in the English 18th century, you get the development of two distinct reading audiences. You get the literary minority, those who had always been the ones to get higher education and to learn more languages than just English, and who therefore considered themselves intellectually superior. And then you had the newly literate and steadily growing majority of people who were hungry for reading material because they could now read. And a writer could only become literary if they were recognized by this tiny elite. And that social division has never really died. And it created an assumption that the only really good, the only really serious books are those that get recognized as literary. And I know that some content creators react to that pressure in different ways, either by leaning towards literary or leaning towards the popular. Some people mix it up. I try to mix it up because I feel that Macunaíma for me was a mythic reminder that the popular has value and it has importance. And just as Macunaíma balanced his opposite characteristics, it's always good to balance opposites. It's always good to enjoy something of one thing and something of its opposite, to keep things balanced. So that means enjoying some popular fiction as well as those books that are approved by whatever cultural elites are judging our books today. And that's the review done. It's going to be interesting to see whether now that the English translation of Macunaíma is out, whether it will become more important, more recognized as it is in Brazil. I don't know. That will be interesting to see. Will it become part of an international canon? In fact, is there an international canon? Has anyone ever put together one of those? Anyway, that's enough from me. I will be back midweek with a non-fiction review, which is still too Eurocentric. I'm really going to take some steps to correct that in August. In the meantime, everybody, have good reading. And I look forward to seeing you again in a few days' time. Take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah, okay. That's it. Yes.